we're diving into a really powerful approach to living. It's one that promises to help you, outgrow problems and lead a more fulfilling life. Our guide for this deep dive is Constructive Living by David K. Reynolds. It's a book that's, deeply rooted in Japanese Morita Therapy. And it's less about those quick fixes, more about building a really robust, practical foundation for everyday life.
It really is foundational. This deep dive, we're going to unpack a strategy for navigating life's challenges, the inevitable ones, everything from, say, shyness to chronic pain. And what's so compelling, I think, is that these ideas, while Reynolds distilled them for a Western audience, their origins go back hundreds of years, basically Buddhist principles, but really boil down into highly practical, common sense wisdom. It just shows how universal the human experience is, right? Suffering and the path to addressing it.
Okay, so let's jump right into the core of it then. The book kicks off with this concept. It sounds simple, but it's profound. Life is attention. It highlights how our brains are constantly filtering out just vast amounts of information. And the striking truth, maybe, is that we only truly experience pain or distress when we actively notice we're hurting.
Yeah, it's a concept maybe best seen in extreme examples, like think of soldiers in battle or people in accidents. They perform these incredible feats despite really severe injuries, and then they only collapse from the pain much later, when their attention finally registers the wound. Or even some surgical procedures, historically carried out just with distraction, no anesthesia, simply by redirecting attention. The principle is really clear. If your attention isn't fixed on the hurt, well, the hurt isn't dominating your experience in that moment.
That's a really powerful distinction. So the strategy isn't about escaping unpleasant feelings, not through distractions like a vacation or, alcohol. Instead, the book suggests we accept those feelings exactly as they are and then immediately pivot to constructive action. The goal isn't really to make sorrow vanish forever, because maybe it won't. It's more about fixing our attention so firmly on behaving constructively that our emotions just become less central, less of a big deal.
And this brings us to a really crucial, maybe challenging first principle Reynolds wants us to get. It's that feelings. They're uncontrollable directly by the will. You just can't wish yourself into a better mood. Simple as that. Trying to force positive feelings, it's often just a waste of effort. It diverts energy from the one thing that is directly controllable.
Which is our behavior.
Exactly, our behavior.
It's pretty counterintuitive for a lot of us, right? Given how much focus modern society puts on just feeling good. But, okay, feelings aren't directly controllable. Does the book suggest they're just permanent fixtures? Like, are we stuck with them? Interestingly, no. It proposes that even the most powerful emotions have a kind of natural lifespan. The worst grief, the worst pain, the worst fright, it will naturally lose its intensity over time.
That's right. They fade unless they're re-stimulated. The book gives this classic example, Jennifer, right? After a breakup, she actively keeps her sorrow alive.
Yeah.
By playing old songs, looking at old photos, replaying memories in her head. She's performing actions that continuously re-energize those feelings of loss.
Okay.
But, and this is key, it also applies to pleasant feelings, joy, contentment. They also fade unless you re-energize them through conscious action.
So this leads us straight to the heart of constructive living, doesn't it? No matter what feelings you have, good, bad, indifferent, you can control your actions if you choose to exert yourself. While the idea of going with the flow of impulses and emotions sounds kind of romantic, real life often demands self-controlled behavior. Letting shifting emotions dictate everything, that can quickly lead to real-world problems. Unpaid bills, maybe losing your job, poor health. Okay, so if controlling our behavior is the key, how does this actually play out? Like when we're facing down common problems, shyness, depression, fear, let's explore some specific real-world applications from the book.
Right. One of the first areas Reynolds tackles is self-centeredness and suffering. He makes this observation. The most peaceful people, they're often those who have, in a sense, given themselves away, focused outward. While the most miserable are often intensely self-focused. He shares this example of a young man who was just consumed by the belief that everyone was staring at him. Why? Because his attention was entirely turned inward. There's the Japanese term jiko-chushin, which literally captures this, the self in the middle of the heart, putting old number one first all the time.
So the core idea there is that doing actually changes our internal states, our attitudes. Focusing on serving others or just dedicating yourself to what a situation requires, that can really cut down on self-centeredness. And interestingly, it's also noted that what we sometimes label as neurotic suffering, well, in some cases, it can actually be a catalyst for greatness. He points to figures like the Buddha.
Yeah, and building on that, the book introduces this call to be realistic.
Yeah.
Morita, the therapy's founder, he compared his approach to a kind of Copernican revolution for the mind. He noted that for someone struggling, their subjective world often seems to have them right at the center, like everything revolves around their feelings, when in reality, they need to revolve around reality itself, which means accepting simple facts. You know, that flower is red, you weigh X pounds, grass is green, just what is. Unrealistic thinking, like obsessing over what might happen or clinging to some idealized image, it's just a major distraction from what truly needs doing right here, right now.
And then there's this really powerful concept the book introduces, finding the kernel of good. It suggests that, unlike maybe a typical Western tendency towards critique, the Japanese often skillfully find positive elements, even in mistakes or apparent faults. Like Taoism's idea that no one ever tells a lie, meaning if you understand the motive, you find a truth. Or Buddhism's view that humans are fundamentally good, just sometimes, misdirected.
This naturally leads us to think about fear. How does this kernel of good idea apply there? Well, the book posits that fear itself. It's actually a healthy emotion. It produces caution. It helps us survive. That's its job. The real issue isn't the fear itself, but when it consumes us, when it prevents us from meeting our daily responsibilities. Take Michelle, the example in the book. Terrified of cancer, she was wasting immense energy trying to overcome what is essentially a natural fear. But when she redirected her attention to living and even to volunteer work related to health hazards, her extreme fears naturally diminished. The fear in her case was that kernel of good. It eventually led her to constructive action.
That makes so much sense. So if you're navigating life's rough times, right, feeling discouraged, the advice is recognize it as a feeling. Okay, I feel discouraged, accept it, and then immediately turn your attention to what needs to be done about your present reality. Act to change what needs changing, but not with the primary goal of getting rid of the discouragement. The feelings, the book suggests, will naturally pass as your attention shifts towards responsible behavior.
And for something really common, like shyness. The secret, maybe surprisingly, is to accept that you are shy. Just acknowledge it. Okay, I'm shy, but then go on doing what you need to do anyway. If your knees are quivering, make that phone call. If your heart is pounding, give that speech. The paradox here is that the more you do these things, the less shy you often feel. Why?
Because your attention shifts.
Exactly. Your attention naturally shifts away from your internal state, your pounding heart, and onto the demands of the situation itself.
Wow, this really feels like a complete reversal of how we normally approach emotions. And here's a really profound example from the book on depression. The author, David Reynolds himself, he deliberately induced depression in himself. For a research project, he created this persona, David Kent, and he discovered firsthand feelings follow behavior. So slouching, sighing, repeating phrases of despair that consistently created the mood of depression. And to snap out of it, to bring David Reynolds back, he had to physically activate himself, seek more stimuli, interact with friends, even when he absolutely didn't feel like it. The behavior itself was the catalyst. It lifted the mood.
And that concept extends directly to fear and stress. There's the story of Carlos. He got a promotion, felt scared, and his core problem wasn't the fear itself, but that he thought he shouldn't feel that way. He was trying to make the fear disappear.
Right. Resisting it.
Yeah. He was basically given permission. Okay, feel stressed. That's normal. And then crucially, he acted. Started talking to other leaders, studying, connecting with his team, gathering data, just doing the work. And the more he acted, the less he noticed his fear.
The lesson seems to be stress only really eats away at us when we don't act to change the situation causing it. Grief is another big one the book tackles. It suggests a kind of healthy middle ground between just bottling it all up, suppressing emotions, and, completely uncontrolled outbursts. When we lose something important, feeling sorrow is natural. It's appropriate. The effort to control the grief, to force it away, often just makes it worse. We need to recognize it, accept the feelings of loss, allow them to pass in their own time, unless, of course, we keep re-stimulating them and seek comfort from friends. That's part of the process.
And these principles, they're also applied to chronic pain and chronic illness, which is huge for many people. The book features individuals like Carl, struggling with kidney issues, and Laura with chronic back pain. For conditions where there isn't a cure, the goal becomes management, right? Not elimination. So the advice is to focus on what needs to be done despite the pain, whether that means rescheduling activities, adjusting your environment, whatever it takes. And there's this powerful insight. People who moan endlessly about their suffering often report hurting more than those with the exact same disease who focus on living constructively. It really is about losing yourself in the doing. And this even includes the final circumstance of living, dying. The book frames dying, too, as an experience to be met constructively.
And what about for those just feeling drained, experiencing lack of energy? Well, after ruling out any physical causes, obviously, the advice is surprisingly direct. Exercise, even if you're tired. Especially if you're tired, maybe.
Counterintuitive, right?
Totally. But activity, it generates energy. The recommendation is even to cut down on unnecessary rest periods. The perpetually exhausted person, the book suggests, is often quite self-focused, maybe exaggerating minor bodily complaints. The secret: be too busy living to notice them so much.
And finally, in this section, we look at troubled romance and marriage. The approach here is about working with partners individually, fostering personal growth in each person. So instead of assigning blame, you did this, you did that, each person operates as if they are the sole cause of the difficulties.
Taking full responsibility.
Exactly. And the practical applications, things like surprise prisons, secret acts of service even, and maybe especially when you're angry, or making daily lists. What did my partner do for me today? And what troubles did I cause today? This focus on behavioral change, it helps align attitudes. It embodies that maxim, Thanksgiving behavior generates thanks feeling.
Love, like a garden, fundamentally requires work, consistent effort.
Okay, so beyond these direct applications to sort of everyday problems, constructive living offers some really profound notes. These deepen our understanding. First, on mastering the principles, the book really hammers home that intellectual understanding. It isn't enough, not by itself.
Right.
It's about experiential understanding. He gives the example of a client who understood Morita Therapy theory perfectly, but couldn't find her way out of a building.
Yeah.
Or the author asking a very theory-focused student mid-discussion, how's your salad?
Yeah.
It's about the experience of the present moment, the doing within it. That's paramount. And this naturally leads us to ask, what are the limits? Right? This method isn't a magic bullet for everything. It has limits when we are realistically unable to do what must be done, say due to severe physical limitations. That's real. Or for genuinely involuntary behaviors like maybe stuttering or chronic insomnia. These are seen as more like feelings not directly controllable by will. But the book isn't about giving up, even then. The tactic is, again, acceptance. Accept them. Stop struggling against them directly, and then focus on doing what can be done. For insomnia, maybe that means maintaining a really regular sleep schedule. For something like impotence, focusing on pleasing one's partner can, maybe surprisingly, revive one's own capacities.
The book also touches on some significant barriers to improvement, like simply not wanting to change. You see this, it suggests, in those who habitually blame society or others for their own suffering?
Externalizing everything.
Yeah. And it makes a strong case against purely conditioning programs, like behavior modification alone. It argues that while they might produce results, they often lead to rigid, sort of mechanistic responses, not the flexible, self-disciplined behavior needed for truly outgrowing problems in a dynamic world.
Another really thought-provoking aspect is its stance on mislabeling. This one's quite radical. Reynolds suggests, for example, there are no homosexuals, only homosexual moments.
Wow.
Yeah, challenging labels like neurotic or lazy bum because they imply permanence. They limit our recognition of human flexibility. These labels can effectively force us to conform to these static kind of cardboard images of ourselves.
Yeah.
The advice, cultivate a life orientation, a direction, rather than letting ourselves be defined by a single fixed label.
That connects really powerfully to the reflection on living until we die. Death, for most of us, it's an abstraction, right? But dying, that will be an experienced reality for all of us. Constructive living is presented as, essentially, training for all moments, including the final ones. The book recounts how Professor Morita, the founder, even on his deathbed, he used his last breaths to teach.
Incredible.
Yeah. Demonstrating how dying can also be just another circumstance, another experience to meet with attentive exploration and constructive response.
The author also shares this interesting experience with a client who was writing a novel. The client felt his idea was no longer his after a friend suggested a plot change. He got stuck.
The book makes a crucial point here. What makes a piece of writing truly mine? It's the effort, the behavior of putting word after word on paper, ideas. They can come from anywhere, that's fine. But the tangible, created product, that's solely the result of one's own behavior, one's own action. The greater moral failure, it argues, isn't borrowing an idea. It's letting a purpose, a potential creation, wither through inactivity. And maybe one of the most counterintuitive but potentially powerful insights comes from this section called the sensible second mile.
Oh.
It's inspired by the New Testament idea, go the extra mile. It advises doing more than is strictly required.
How so?
Well, examples like shining a strict stepfather's shoes even when you don't feel like it, or even sending money to a brother who actually owes you money.
Okay, that sounds tough.
It does, but it's not about servitude. It's framed as voluntary self-sacrifice. And the point is, the act itself changes you. It grants you this profound sense of control and inner freedom, paradoxically.
And ultimately, all these principles, they circle back to what the book calls the culture factor.
Yeah.
While Morita's methods originated in Japan, they are fundamentally universally applicable. Human nature is human nature. However, certain Western traits like impatience, the pressure for instant results, our reluctance maybe to face pain directly, maybe simple laziness, these can make it harder to fully embrace constructive living because this life way, it demands slow, sometimes painful effort. It requires unwavering attention, patience, self-discipline, and real honesty with oneself. It asks you to face your feelings squarely, accept them, and then guide your behavior in constructive directions, even when it's uncomfortable, especially them, perhaps.
So this deep dive, as you can probably tell by now, isn't just about understanding concepts. It's fundamentally about action, doing things. And the book provides several practical exercises to help you validate these principles experientially for yourself.
Absolutely. And they're designed to be put into practice right away. Like exercise I, life is attention. Simply sit quietly, focus intently on one single object for 5 minutes. Notice when your mind drifts, because it will, and gently bring your attention back. This just helps you realize that thoughts, much like feelings, they just bubble up. They aren't directly controllable by your will. Then there's exercise 2. Scheduled living. For a whole week, commit to a strict schedule, eating, exercising at least 30 minutes daily, and sleeping. At set times, you'll probably find it challenging. But the goal is to consistently return to the schedule, regardless of how you feel. Mood doesn't dictate the schedule. It's a powerful way to build self-discipline and establish a stable baseline for yourself.
Makes sense.
Exercise 3, the diary. Divide a page in half, left side. List your specific behaviors, right side. Note your feelings and thoughts at that time. This helps you clearly separate your controllable actions from your, uncontrollable internal states. And you can observe how feelings often fluctuate, sometimes totally independently of what you're actually doing.
Seeing it on paper.
Exactly. Then exercise V. Exploring purposes. Throughout your day, for every action you take, just consciously ask yourself, what is my purpose in doing this right now? This helps you critically examine both your immediate aims and your longer-range goals. Why am I really doing this? Exercise 6. Noticing surroundings. Go for a walk, somewhere unfamiliar. Consciously try to memorize every detail. Then do the same thing somewhere familiar. You'll be surprised what you miss. Even try it at a social gathering. This exercise directly trains your attention, pulls it away from self-focus outward towards engaging with reality.
Getting out of your own head.
Precisely. And finally, exercise 7, writing poetry, engaging in forms like haiku or tanka. These demand really concise observations of reality. They can powerfully help shift your awareness away from internal passions and towards the objective world around you.
And alongside these structured exercises, the book offers some really straightforward practical tips for daily life, like avoid just sitting around aimlessly. Get up and move. Simple as that. If you're struggling with sleep, try this. Go an entire evening without sitting down at home. Physically tire yourself out. It can significantly improve sleep.
Right, that activity-generating energy idea again.
Exactly. Put notes about your purposes, your why on your refrigerator, your bathroom mirror, somewhere you'll see them. And even simple things like changing your environment slightly or how you dress can serve as a reminder, a signal to yourself that you're actively working towards this constructive lifestyle.
Yeah, the overarching message of all these practices really is about redirecting your inherent sensitivity and energy. We all have it. But instead of using it to protect yourself or notice your own perceived faults all the time, rechannel it outwards towards noticing others' needs and simply meeting the immediate demands of reality, whatever's right in front of you.
Okay, so as we start to wrap up this deep dive, what does all of this really mean for you listening right now? Constructive living isn't about magically eliminating problems from your life. That's just not how life works, is it?
No.
Instead, it's about being, in a sense, on top of the world. Not because the world is perfect, but because you're firmly in control of your actions within the world.
And the maxims distilled from constructive living offer incredibly clear, almost stark guidance. Keep on doing what needs to be done. Simple. Not easy, but simple. Recognize that symptoms are misattention, meaning your focus is probably misplaced if you're overly focused on a symptom. Understand there are two kinds of can't. There's real impossibility, and then there's just I won't or I'm afraid to try. Be honest about which it is.
That's a big one.
It is. And if you find yourself asking, am I depressed? Well, the constructive living answer often comes back. Get moving. Action first.
It truly is a profound shift in perspective, isn't it? Moving from that passive focus on what's happening to you to an empowered focus on what you do in response, whatever happens. It's about accepting all of reality, the good, the bad, the difficult feelings, and then just getting on with what needs doing.
So as we conclude this deep dive, maybe consider this thought from the book. If the quality of a life is ultimately defined not by how we feel moment to moment, but by what we do, by how we engage with the reality presented to us, then perhaps the most impactful freedom we can find comes not from trying to control our ever-shifting emotional state, but from relentlessly training ourselves to respond purposefully, no matter what. So the question becomes, what small, deliberate, constructive action will you take today, regardless of how you happen to feel right now?
That is a powerful thought to leave you with. We really hope this deep dive into constructive living has given you some practical insights, maybe a fresh perspective on navigating whatever challenges life throws your way.